All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to look at a figure you think you know, Jesus, but through a totally different lens. I mean, one you've probably never considered. We're talking about a connection between the ancient Middle East and the shamanistic traditions of Asia. Seriously. It's a perspective that might just flip how you see this really familiar story. So yeah, let's just dive right in. We're all familiar with Jesus as a teacher, a savior, a major religious figure, right? But what if we just for a second put all those labels on a shelf and instead we just look at what he did? The healing, the exorcisms. What if we tried to understand those actions through the lens of another ancient figure, the shaman?
Okay, so to even start exploring that pretty wild idea, we've got to get on the same page about the world a shaman actually lives in. We need a quick primer on some of the core beliefs that were, foundational for a lot of early religions.
First up is something called animism. It comes from the Latin word anima, which means soul. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's this belief that everything, and I'm talking everything, not just people and animals, but plants, rocks, rivers, you name it, has its own spirit, its own soul. So in this worldview, the entire world is just buzzing with spiritual energy. It's alive. And from that idea, you get totemism. This is where a whole group of people, a community, feels this really deep spiritual bond with a specific animal or plant. That's their totem. It's way more than just a mascot or a symbol. It's seen as a real protector, a kind of spiritual ancestor that's woven into the very fabric of who they are.
And that brings us finally to shamanism. Now, the word shaman itself actually comes from Siberia, and it refers to a very special kind of person. This is someone who can essentially cross over. They can journey into the spirit world to act as a bridge, a mediator. Their whole job is to fix things, heal the sick, get glimpses of the future, and maybe most importantly, to bring back balance and harmony between our world and the spirit world.
All right, so now that we have that foundation, let's get specific. The real key that unlocks this whole comparison between Jesus and a shaman, well, it comes from a very particular and very ancient Korean tradition. This right here is from a really famous scholar from way back in the Silla dynasty named Che Chiwon. And he talks about this profound, mysterious way called Pungnyudo or Pungnyudo. What's important here is that he's showing us this wasn't just some simple folk custom. No, this was a deep, philosophical, and spiritual path that was a core part of Korean history. And right at the heart of this Pungnyudo philosophy is this four-character phrase, Jo Ha Gunsang. I know, it looks a little complicated, but the idea behind it is actually super simple and incredibly powerful. This right here, this is the concept that's going to unlock everything for us. So, let's just break it down. Jo, that means to connect. Then Hwa, that means to harmonize. And Gunsing, that's basically all living things, the whole community of life. So you put it all together, and Jo Hwa Gunsang is this active mission. It's the job of connecting with all life and then bringing it all into harmony. See, it's not just a nice idea, it's a call to action.
And boom, that brings us right back to the shaman. Because what is this act of connecting and harmonizing? It's bridging all the gaps, right? Between heaven and earth, between spirits and people, even between one person and another. That is the shaman's ultimate job. They are, for all intents and purposes, the great reconciler.
Okay, and this is the aha moment. This is where it all clicks. Just look at this side by side. The shaman's role is to mediate between worlds. Jesus's role is to mediate to God. The shaman heals the sick and exorcises spirits. Jesus heals the sick and exorcises demons. A shaman's whole goal is to reconcile all life, and Jesus's mission? To reconcile humanity. I mean, when you lay it out like that, the parallels in what they do, they're just impossible to ignore. And this isn't just us drawing lines between concepts. The argument actually goes straight to the source, pointing to specific passages in the Bible where Jesus is described in ways that sound an awful lot like this great reconciler we've been talking about. So take a look at this from Ephesians. It says, Jesus is the one who made the two groups one and tore down the dividing wall of hostility. I mean, listen to that language. Tearing down walls, making things one, that is a perfect echo of Joyofagan sang, right? Connecting what's been divided and bringing it all into harmony. And then there's this other really fascinating bit from Hebrews.
It connects Jesus to this figure Melchizedek. Now, Melchizedek was this super mysterious priest king who was completely outside the normal hereditary priesthood. And the argument here is that this is exactly like a shaman's calling. Their authority doesn't come from who their father was. It comes from a direct, personal, spiritual connection. It's not inherited, it's experienced. So let's zoom out for a second. What's the big picture here? Well, you can almost start to see Christianity and shamanism as like fraternal twins, born in totally different parts of the world, raised in completely different cultures. But when you look closely, they seem to share this surprisingly similar spiritual DNA. And you can see it laid out really clearly right here. You've got Christianity from the 1st century Middle East. Its core figure is the Messiah, who mediates for salvation. Then you've got shamanism from North Asia. Its core figure is the shaman, who mediates for harmony. You see? Different places, different names, different goals even, but the function is startlingly similar. A central figure who bridges that gap between the human and the divine, all for the good of their people. And this whole idea of fraternal twins actually played out in a very real way on the Korean peninsula. Shamanism was the original indigenous belief system. Then, around the early 20th century, you have these new religions popping up that were still rooted in those old shamanic ideas. So when Christianity finally arrived, it wasn't landing on a blank slate, not at all. It had to interact with, compete with, and even be influenced by these really deep, long-standing native beliefs. So when you put all these pieces together, this different picture of Jesus starts to take shape. When you look at him through this ancient shamanistic lens, his work, his ministry, it lines up almost perfectly with the job of the ultimate shaman. He's a healer, he's an exorcist, and maybe most importantly, he is a great reconciler whose whole purpose is to connect and harmonize a broken, divided world. And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. The point here isn't to say, okay, Jesus was a shaman, not a savior. It's not about replacing one label with another. It's about expanding our view. What happens when we see these incredibly deep parallels in the function of belief systems from totally different corners of the globe? How does that change how we think about the very foundation of faith, that universal human need for connection, for healing, and for meaning?